Make sure the staff stays out of the family photos, my mother whispered to the wedding coordinator while standing less than 3 feet away from me. She didn't even lower her voice. She didn't have to. In my family, I had never been important enough to protect. I kept my eyes on the silver tray balanced carefully in my hands and pretended not to hear her. The ballroom of the Grand Bellamy Country Club glowed with soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. White roses covered every table. A string quartet played near the marble staircase while guests in designer suits and silk dresses laughed over glasses of champagne that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My younger sister Olivia stood in the center of it all like a queen. Her satin wedding gown flowed behind her in perfect waves while photographers followed her every smile. People stopped talking when she walked by. They called her radiant, stunning, perfect. My mother lived for those words. I adjusted the cuff of my plain black catering uniform and stepped quietly around a table near the dance floor. At 34 years old, I had spent most of my life learning how to disappear. Table 7 needs fresh champagne, my father said as he passed me without making eye contact. Not Evelyn. Not sweetheart. Not even a simple please. Just another task. Another order. The same way he had spoken to me since I was old enough to reach the kitchen sink. I nodded softly and moved toward the serving station behind the ballroom curtains. The other catering staff assumed I worked for the venue. None of them realized I was the bride's older sister. Honestly, most of the wedding guests probably didn't know either. There were framed family photos displayed near the entrance to the ballroom. Olivia at her graduation. Olivia at horseback riding competitions. Olivia on family vacations in Aspen and Napa Valley. Olivia smiling between our parents at every holiday gathering. I wasn't in a single picture. Not one. At first, when I was younger, I used to think it was accidental. Maybe I had stepped away when the camera flashed. Maybe there just weren't enough copies printed. But eventually, even, children understand when they're unwanted. I learned that lesson early. Evelyn. My mother's voice cut sharply through the noise behind me. I turned around quickly. Margaret Carter stood beside the floral display with her perfectly styled blonde hair and diamond earrings catching the ballroom lights. Even at 62, she looked elegant enough to belong on the cover of a magazine. She always cared deeply about appearances. Yes, I asked quietly. Her eyes moved over my uniform with visible irritation. Why are you standing around out here? She asked. The kitchen is backed up. I was just bringing drinks to table 7. Then hurry up. And for heaven's sake, stay away from Olivia while the photographers are working. I swallowed carefully. Okay. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough this time to sound cruel instead of loud. This day is important to your sister. Don't make things awkward by hovering around the family. Then she walked away before I could answer. I stood there for a second holding the tray against my chest while laughter and music filled the ballroom around me. The strange thing was, her words didn't shock me anymore. They should have. A normal daughter would probably cry hearing her own mother speak that way. But pain loses its sharpness when it becomes routine. I carried the champagne across the ballroom and set fresh glasses onto table 7 while guests smiled politely at me without really seeing me. One woman in a navy blue gown handed me her empty glass and said, "You catering girls are working so hard tonight." I simply nodded. Correcting her felt pointless. Near the stage, Olivia laughed loudly while adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother. When Grandma Rose passed away 8 years ago, she left a handwritten note asking for the bracelet to go to me because, in her words, Evelyn is the only gentle soul in this family. My mother claimed the note had been misplaced. 2 months later, Olivia wore the bracelet to a charity gala. That was the moment I stopped believing accidents happened in our house. "Excuse me," a deep voice said nearby. I turned slightly. An older man stood beside the champagne tower watching me carefully. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his charcoal suit probably cost more than my car. I recognized him immediately from the wedding rehearsal dinner the night before. Richard Whitmore, the groom's father. He was one of the wealthiest developers in Connecticut, though people often described him as unusually private for someone with his level of influence. Tonight, he looked strangely unsettled. His eyes stayed fixed on my face in a way that made me uncomfortable. "Are you all right carrying that by yourself?" he asked gently. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. No one had asked if I was all right in a very long time. "I'm fine," I said softly. His gaze shifted to the silver necklace resting against my collarbone. I instinctively touched it with my fingertips. It was old and slightly tarnished, shaped like a tiny crescent moon. I had worn it almost every day since childhood. "Where did you get that necklace?" he asked suddenly. My chest tightened slightly at the question. "I've had it since I was a baby," I answered. "My mother said it came with me from the hospital." Richard's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face so quickly it frightened me. His hand tightened around the champagne glass he was holding. "That's impossible," he whispered under his breath. Before I could respond, another voice interrupted sharply behind me. "Evelyn." My father appeared beside us with tension written across his face. Thomas Carter rarely looked nervous, but now his jaw was stiff and his eyes avoided Richard completely. "The kitchen needs you," he said quickly. Richard didn't look away from me. "She's your daughter?" he asked slowly. My father hesitated, just for half a second, but I noticed it. Richard noticed it too. "Yes," my father answered finally, though his voice sounded strained. "Now if you'll excuse us, she has work to do." He grabbed my arm lightly, steering me away from the ballroom. Not aggressively, just urgently. Too urgently. As we disappeared behind the curtains leading toward the kitchen, I glanced back one last time. Richard Whitmore was still, standing near the champagne tower, staring directly at me like he had just seen someone return from the dead. The kitchen behind the ballroom felt like a completely different world from the glittering wedding outside. The music from the string quartet became muffled behind heavy double doors, replaced by the sharp clatter of dishes, hurried footsteps, and the smell of butter and roasted garlic hanging thick in the air. I stood beside the industrial sink rinsing champagne glasses while my father paced near the stainless steel prep table with unusual tension written across his face. He kept glancing toward the doors leading back into the ballroom, as if he expected someone to come storming through them at any moment. "What did you say to him?" he asked suddenly. I looked up from the sink. "Who?" "Richard Whitmore." His voice came out sharper than he intended. I dried my hands slowly with a white towel. "Nothing important." He asked about my necklace. For a second, the room went completely still around us. Even the dishwasher loading trays nearby seemed quieter somehow. My father stared at me so intensely that I felt uncomfortable. Then my mother walked into the kitchen carrying part of Olivia's wedding train over one arm to keep it clean from the floor. Her face was tight with irritation. "Richard Whitmore has been asking questions," she said immediately. "Questions about Evelyn." My father rubbed his jaw. "I know." My mother turned toward me with cold eyes. "Take the dessert trays out through the side entrance. And stay away from the Whitmore family for the rest of the night." I nodded automatically because obedience had become instinct long ago. It was easier than arguing. Easier than pretending I still expected kindness from them. My mother stepped closer and adjusted the collar of my catering uniform like she was fixing something offensive. "Honestly," she muttered, "I do not know why he suddenly became interested in you." I said nothing. The truth was, I did not understand it either. Men like Richard Whitmore did not notice women like me. Wealthy people barely noticed service workers at all unless something went wrong. Yet when he looked at me near the champagne tower, his expression had not been casual curiosity. It had looked like grief, like shock, like recognition. My mother suddenly grabbed the necklace resting against my collarbone. "You should stop wearing this old thing," she said quietly. "It looks cheap." Her fingers tightened around the silver crescent moon charm before she let go. I instinctively stepped backward. "Grandma Rose liked it," I answered softly. "Grandma Rose also filled your head with nonsense," my mother snapped. Then she turned and walked back toward the ballroom before I could answer. I stood frozen for a moment after she left. The necklace rested cold against my skin. I remembered the first time I had asked where it came from. I was maybe 7 years old, sitting on the kitchen counter while my mother baked pies for Thanksgiving dinner. I had traced the little silver moon with my fingertips and asked why I had it. She barely looked at me when she answered. "It was around your neck when we brought you home from the hospital." At 7 years old, I thought every baby arrived with jewelry. Later I realized how strange that answer actually was. "Evelyn," one of the caterers called. "Can you bring these desserts out?" "Sure." I lifted the heavy silver tray filled with miniature cakes and walked toward the side entrance leading back into the ballroom. The wedding reception had grown louder while I was inside the kitchen. Guests crowded the dance floor beneath sparkling lights, while Olivia spun dramatically in her satin gown at the center of attention. Her new husband Daniel smiled beside her, though though he looked slightly exhausted already. Weddings always seemed strange to me. Thousands of dollars spent for one perfect evening. One perfect illusion. I carefully moved through the crowd balancing dessert plates while conversations floated around me. The flowers alone must have cost 20 grand. Did you see the imported ice sculpture? Margaret Carter truly outdid herself. My mother loved hearing things like that. Appearance meant everything to her. Success, beauty, status, perfect photos, perfect parties, perfect daughter. Olivia had inherited all the traits my mother valued most. Blonde hair, bright smile, easy charm. People naturally noticed Olivia when she entered a room. Me? I learned years ago that some people are treated like background furniture no matter where they stand. Excuse me. I stepped aside as a photographer hurried past carrying extra camera equipment. Near the head table, I noticed Richard Whitmore sitting alone for the first time all evening. He was not watching the dance floor. He was watching me again. The intensity of it made my stomach tighten slightly. As I set desserts onto a nearby table, he slowly stood from his chair. Before I could move away, he crossed the ballroom directly toward me. "Miss Carter," he said gently. My pulse quickened a little. "Yes. Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" I hesitated instinctively and glanced toward my parents across the ballroom. My mother noticed immediately. I saw panic flicker across her face before she forced another polished smile for nearby guests. "I should probably get back to work," I answered carefully. Richard lowered his voice slightly. "Please, there is something I need to ask you." Something in his tone felt deeply serious. Not flirtatious. Not casual. Almost desperate. Against my better judgment, I nodded once. We walked quietly toward a small outdoor terrace overlooking the country club gardens. The cold October air hit my skin the second we stepped outside. Inside, music and laughter continued beneath warm lights. Outside, everything felt strangely quiet. Richard turned toward me slowly beneath the terrace lanterns. Up close, he looked older than I first realized. Not weak, just tired in a way that comes from carrying grief too long. His eyes moved once more to the necklace around my throat. "I know this is going to sound strange," he said carefully, "but where exactly did your parents say you were born?" I frowned slightly. "Hartford Memorial Hospital. Do you have a birth certificate?" "I think so." He looked away for a second, jaw tightening slightly. 34 years ago, he said quietly, my wife gave birth to a little girl at Hartford Memorial. A cold feeling slowly spread through my chest. What does that have to do with me? Richard swallowed hard before answering. The baby disappeared 2 days later. I stared at him without breathing. What? His voice became rough with emotion. The hospital claimed there had been complications. We were told our daughter died unexpectedly during the night. He paused, but we never saw her body. The terrace suddenly felt colder around me. I do not understand, I whispered. Richard's eyes filled with something painfully close to heartbreak. Because when I saw your face tonight, he said softly, it was like looking at my wife 30 years ago. And that necklace, his voice faltered briefly. I gave an identical necklace to my daughter the day she was born. The cold air on the terrace suddenly felt too thin to breathe properly. I stared at Richard Whitmore, while the music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the glass doors behind us. Somewhere inside, people were laughing. Glasses clinked. Olivia's wedding continued like nothing in the world had changed. But something had changed. I could feel it settling quietly beneath my skin like the beginning of an earthquake. That is impossible, I whispered finally. Richard looked at me with an expression so raw and unsettled that it made my chest tighten painfully. I know how it sounds, he said softly. Believe me, I do. His hands rested against the terrace railing as though he needed something solid to steady himself. But the moment I saw you tonight, he stopped speaking for a second and shook his head slightly. You have my wife's eyes. I instinctively looked away. Nobody had ever said I resembled anyone before. Not really. Growing up, my parents avoided conversations about appearance entirely when it came to me. Olivia was beautiful. Olivia looked exactly like our mother. Olivia had our father's smile. But me? Whenever relatives mentioned that I looked different, the room always became uncomfortable. My mother would laugh too quickly and change the subject. As a child, I noticed things adults assumed I did not understand. I noticed how family friends sometimes stared at me with confusion before saying, "She does not look much like the rest of you, does she?" I noticed how my father's expression hardened every time someone pointed it out. I noticed how my mother stopped displaying newer family photos altogether once I became old enough to stand beside Olivia in pictures. Evelyn. Richard's voice gently pulled me back to the terrace. Are you all right? I nodded automatically, even though I was not sure what all right was supposed to feel like anymore. My thoughts kept circling around the necklace. The tiny silver crescent moon resting against my skin suddenly felt heavier than before. You said your daughter disappeared from the hospital? I asked quietly. Richard looked down toward the dark gardens below the terrace. 34 years ago, he said slowly. My wife Claire gave birth to our first child. We were young, terrified, happy. A sad smile touched his face briefly before fading. Claire was exhausted after the delivery, but she refused to let the nurses take the baby away for very long. She held her almost constantly. He paused. Then one night, a doctor told us there had been complications. His jaw tightened. They said our daughter passed away unexpectedly in the nursery. Something inside me twisted painfully at the grief still lingering in his voice after all these years. Did they explain what happened? Richard gave a quiet, bitter laugh without humor. Not clearly. Everything felt rushed. Confusing. We were devastated. Claire begged to see the baby one last time, but the hospital claimed there had already been arrangements made because of some infection risk. He rubbed one hand across his face slowly. At the time, we were too heartbroken to fight. We trusted them. The silence between us grew heavy. But you do not trust them anymore, I said softly. Richard looked directly at me. No, his voice became firmer. Because 6 months later, the nurse who handled our case disappeared from the hospital without warning. There were rumors about missing records, falsified paperwork, illegal adoptions. My stomach tightened. Illegal adoptions? Nothing was ever proven. He exhaled slowly. But Claire never believed our daughter died. Not completely. She spent years searching for answers before she passed away. I froze. Slightly. Your wife passed away. He nodded once. 8 years ago. Breast cancer. I lowered my eyes instinctively. I am sorry. Thank you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distant sound of Olivia laughing floated out from the ballroom again, sharp and bright against the cold night air. Richard's gaze shifted toward the necklace once more. Claire bought that necklace during our honeymoon in Maine, he said quietly. There were only 2 made by the artist. One for her, one for our daughter. A chill moved slowly through my arms. Maybe mine is just similar. Even as I said it, the words sounded weak. Richard studied me carefully. Maybe. But neither of us really believed that anymore. The terrace doors suddenly opened behind us. My mother stepped outside wearing her polished smile again, though tension flickered beneath it. There you are, she said brightly, her voice too cheerful to sound natural. Richard, everyone is looking for you inside. Richard straightened slightly, but did not move away from me. Margaret, he said calmly, how long ago did you adopt Evelyn? For one brief second, my mother's entire expression froze. It happened quickly, so quickly most people would have missed it. But I saw it. Fear. Real fear. Then her smile returned almost instantly. Adopt? She repeated lightly. What an odd question. Richard did not smile back. You never mentioned having another daughter before Olivia. My mother laughed softly. Evelyn is older. She has always been quiet and preferred staying out of the spotlight. The lie settled heavily between us. I stared at her face in disbelief. Preferred staying out of the spotlight? As though exclusion had been my choice. As though I had not spent years eating dinner alone in the kitchen while Olivia entertained guests. As though my mother had not introduced me as the responsible one, whenever relatives asked why I was cleaning instead of sitting with everyone else. Richard's voice remained calm, but colder now. You never answered my question. My mother crossed her arms lightly against the evening chill. Honestly, Richard, this feels inappropriate during a wedding reception. Did you adopt Evelyn? He asked again. My mother's jaw tightened almost invisibly. No, she answered carefully. She is our daughter. Richard held her gaze for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, then why does she have my daughter's necklace? The silence afterward felt endless. I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. For the first time in years, I watched her without immediately shrinking inside myself. Her posture remained elegant, controlled, perfect. But beneath that polished exterior, something was unraveling. It was a gift, she said finally. From a relative. Richard nodded once slowly, though it was obvious he did not believe her. I see. My mother immediately turned toward me. Evelyn, Table 12 still needs coffee service. Her voice sharpened slightly on my name. A warning disguised as instruction. The old version of me would have obeyed instantly. The old version of me would have lowered my eyes and rushed back inside without question. But tonight something felt different. Tiny, fragile, still unfamiliar, yet impossible to ignore. For the first time in my life, I looked at my mother and wondered if she was afraid of me. My mother held my gaze for only a second before turning away first. That alone felt unfamiliar enough to leave me unsettled. Margaret Carter never looked away from anyone. She controlled rooms with smiles sharp enough to cut glass, and a voice polished smooth from years of pretending perfection existed inside our family. Yet standing on that cold terrace beside Richard Whitmore, she suddenly looked like someone struggling to keep a fragile wall from collapsing. "The guests are waiting," she said tightly. "We really should not be standing outside discussing old stories." Richard did not move. "Some stories matter," he answered quietly. My mother forced another thin smile. "You are emotional tonight." "Understandably so. Weddings can bring up memories." Then she turned toward me again. "Evelyn, coffee service. Now." The old instinct rose inside me automatically. Obey quickly. Stay quiet. Avoid conflict. I had spent 34 years surviving that way. But my feet remained still against the stone terrace floor. My mother noticed immediately. So did I. The realization startled me more than anything Richard had said about hospitals and missing babies. For the first time in my life, I did not immediately rush to make myself smaller. My mother's expression cooled several degrees. "Did you hear me?" she asked softly. Richard stepped slightly closer before I could answer. "I asked Evelyn a question." My mother's jaw tightened. "And I answered it." "No," Richard replied calmly. "You avoided it." The tension between them settled heavily into the cold night air. Through the ballroom windows, I could see Olivia laughing beside her bridesmaids while photographers captured another perfect moment beneath the chandeliers. She looked beautiful, untouchable, certain the entire evening belonged to her. She had no idea the foundation beneath our family was beginning to crack open. "Richard," my mother said carefully, "I think grief may be influencing your imagination tonight." His eyes hardened slightly for the first time. "My imagination did not create that necklace." Silence. My fingers moved unconsciously to the silver crescent moon resting against my collarbone. Suddenly, I remembered small things I had ignored for years because ignoring them was easier than asking questions nobody wanted to answer. I remembered being 8 years old and finding an old photograph hidden inside my grandmother's dresser drawer. The picture showed my parents holding Olivia as a toddler beside a lake house somewhere in Maine. My mother looked younger, happier. But what I remembered most clearly was the empty space beside them where another figure had been cut away from the photograph completely. I had asked Grandma Rose about it once. She looked startled before quietly taking the picture from my hands. "Some people spend their whole lives hiding from the truth," she said softly. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. Now the memory returned with uncomfortable sharpness. "Evelyn," my mother said again, more firmly this time. Inside, Richard's voice interrupted before I could respond. "Did she ever ask about her birth records?" My mother looked directly at him. "You are crossing a line. Answer the question." She folded her arms tightly. "Of course she has birth records." Richard nodded slowly. "Then showing them should not be difficult." Something flickered across my mother's face again. Panic. Tiny. Fast. But real. "This conversation is absurd," she snapped quietly. "Tonight is Olivia's wedding. I will not allow drama to ruin it." The strange thing was, she did not sound angry about the possibility of hurting me. She sounded terrified about losing control. The terrace doors suddenly opened again before anyone could speak further. Olivia stepped outside holding the edge of her satin gown, with visible irritation already written across her face. "Mom, where have you been?" "The photographer is waiting for family picked." She stopped the second she noticed the tension between us. Her eyes landed on me first, then Richard, then my mother's pale expression. "What is going on?" she asked carefully. My mother immediately straightened her posture. "Nothing important." Olivia frowned. "Then why does everyone look like someone died?" Richard studied Olivia silently for a moment. I noticed something subtle change in his expression. Not disappointment exactly, more like realization, as if he was finally seeing our family clearly for the first time. Olivia looked nothing like me. Nothing like Richard either. Her blonde hair gleamed beneath the terrace lights while mine remained dark chestnut. Her blue eyes matched my mother's perfectly. But beyond appearance, there was something colder underneath. Olivia carried herself with complete confidence because she had spent her entire life knowing she was loved, protected, chosen first. Daniel's parents are asking where you are, Olivia said impatiently to Richard. Especially you. I will be inside shortly, Richard answered calmly. Olivia finally looked directly at me. Why are you standing out here? She asked sharply. The dessert station is running low. There it was again. Not sister. Not Evelyn. Just another task needing completion. Another role assigned to me since childhood. Olivia had never questioned it because nobody around her ever did. When we were children, she received a pony for her 12th birthday while I spent the afternoon scrubbing the kitchen floors after her party guests left. When she went away to college in Boston, my parents converted my room into a home office and moved me permanently into the tiny downstairs guest room beside the laundry machines. They called it temporary. I lived there for 11 years. Evelyn. Olivia snapped impatiently. Did you hear me? Before I could answer, Richard spoke quietly. Do you always speak to your sister that way? Olivia blinked in surprise. What way? Like she works for you. An uncomfortable silence followed immediately. Olivia laughed softly, but it sounded forced. She likes helping. Richard's eyes shifted toward me. Is that true? I opened my mouth automatically, ready to smooth things over the way I always did. Ready to protect everyone else from discomfort. But the words stopped before they came out. Because suddenly I was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending humiliation felt normal. Exhausted from shrinking myself to fit inside the narrow space my family allowed me to occupy. No, I said quietly. Olivia stared at me. My mother froze completely. Even Richard looked slightly surprised. My voice remained soft, but steadier now. I do not like helping, I continued carefully. I just learned a long time ago that nobody cared whether I wanted to or not. The silence afterward felt enormous. Olivia's face hardened instantly. Oh please, she scoffed. Do not start acting like a victim tonight. Olivia, my mother warned quickly. But it was too late. Something inside me had already shifted. Small, fragile, but impossible to force backward now. I looked at my sister standing there wrapped in silk and diamonds beneath warm terrace lights, while I still wore a black catering uniform carrying the smell of coffee and dish soap on my hands. For the first time in my life, I realized something simple and devastating. My family had never accidentally treated me this way. They had chosen to. Olivia stared at me like I had suddenly started speaking another language. The terrace lights reflected sharply against the diamonds around her neck while cold October wind lifted the edge of her veil behind her. For most of our lives, she had spoken and I had listened. She had demanded and I had obeyed. The idea that I might answer honestly instead of quietly accepting blame clearly unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. That is ridiculous, she said finally with a nervous laugh. Mom, seriously, what is this? My mother stepped forward immediately, her polished composure returning piece by piece like armor snapping back into place. Everyone is emotional tonight, she said smoothly. Richard brought up painful memories about his daughter, and now Evelyn is being overly sensitive. Overly sensitive. My mother had used those exact words my entire life whenever I reacted to cruelty. If I cried after being excluded from family dinners, I was overly sensitive. If I asked why Olivia received gifts while I received chores, I was overly sensitive. If I looked hurt after hearing relatives praise Olivia while forgetting my birthday entirely, I was overly sensitive. It was a convenient phrase because it transformed pain into weakness instead of evidence. Richard did not look convinced. Pain usually comes from somewhere, he said quietly. My father suddenly appeared through the terrace doors looking tense enough to snap. His dark suit jacket hung slightly crooked now, and tiny beads of sweat glistened near his temples despite the cold evening air. He looked from my mother to Richard to me with visible alarm. There you all are, he said too quickly. The cake cutting starts in 5 minutes. Nobody moved. My father's eyes landed on me first. Evelyn, he said sharply, the coffee service is delayed. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. Every uncomfortable moment in our family eventually ended the same way. Send Evelyn away. Hide her. Silence her. My father had mastered that technique decades ago. When relatives visited during holidays, I cooked in the kitchen while Olivia sat beside the fireplace opening gifts. When family friends came over for dinner, I served plates while Olivia practiced piano in the living room so guests could admire her talent. My role had always been functional. Invisible things do not need feelings. I think the coffee can wait a minute, Richard said calmly. My father's jaw tightened. Instantly. Actually, the guests are expecting service. Richard held his gaze. And I am expecting answers. The silence that followed stretched painfully long. Through the ballroom windows, guests gathered near the enormous white wedding cake decorated with fresh roses and gold trim. The string quartet shifted into softer music while photographers adjusted lighting equipment around the dance floor. Inside, the reception still looked perfect. Outside on the terrace, everything underneath that perfection was beginning to rot open. This is absurd, Olivia snapped suddenly. Why are we even entertaining this conversation? She turned toward Richard with irritation, replacing her earlier nervousness. With all due respect, my sister is not your missing daughter. Richard looked at her carefully. And you are certain of that? Olivia crossed her arms tightly. Obviously. Based on what? She blinked. What? Based on what? Richard repeated evenly. Because from what I can tell, nobody here seems eager to discuss Evelyn's history. Olivia laughed again, but there was less confidence in it now. There is no history. She is just my sister. Just my sister. Strange how those words managed to sound dismissive instead of loving. Richard glanced toward me briefly before speaking again. Then perhaps you can answer something for me. Why does your family treat her like hired staff at your own wedding? Olivia opened her mouth immediately, then stopped. My mother answered instead. Evelyn prefers staying busy. No, I said quietly. For heads turned toward me at once. My pulse hammered hard enough to make my hands tremble slightly, but I kept speaking anyway. I do not prefer it. The wind moved softly through the terrace gardens while nobody interrupted. I was never asked what I preferred. My father's face darkened instantly. This is not the time for dramatics. Dramatics. Another favorite family word. Anything painful became dramatics the second I acknowledged it aloud. Then when would be the right time? I asked before I could stop myself. The question shocked all of us, including me. My father stared at me like he barely recognized the woman standing in front of him. Honestly, I barely recognized myself either. I had spent so many years swallowing every thought before it reached my mouth that speaking honestly now felt almost dangerous. Evelyn, my mother warned quietly. Enough. But something inside me had already crossed a line I could not uncross. Tiny memories kept surfacing faster now, connecting themselves in ways they never had before. I remembered being 10 years old and overhearing my parents arguing late one night after they thought I was asleep. My father kept saying, "We should have handled this years ago." My mother answered sharply, "Do you want to lose everything?" At the time, I assumed they were discussing money problems. Now I was no longer sure. I remembered how Grandma Rose once pulled me aside during Christmas dinner and whispered, "You were always meant for something better than this house." I remembered finding adoption paperwork hidden inside my father's office drawer when I was 13. The second he saw me holding the folder, he snatched it away so violently that papers scattered across the floor. He told me I had imagined the word adoption. For years, I convinced myself he was right. Children become experts at doubting their own reality when survival depends on it. Richard's voice interrupted my spiraling thoughts gently. "Evelyn," he said, "have you ever seen your birth certificate yourself?" I hesitated. "No, why not?" I looked down at my hands. My parents always handled important documents. Richard nodded slowly like he had expected that answer. My mother suddenly stepped closer to me, her voice low and sharp enough that only we could hear clearly. "Do not embarrass this family tonight." The words settled strangely inside me, because for the first time, I realized something important. Families protect each other. Families comfort each other. Families do not spend decades making one child feel ashamed for existing. Richard straightened slightly beside me. "I would like to arrange a private meeting after the wedding," he said carefully. "With Evelyn." "No," my father answered immediately. "Too fast. Too forceful." Richard noticed it too. That was an unusually quick response. "Because this conversation is finished," my father snapped. "You are upset about your daughter, and now you are projecting fantasies onto my family." Richard's expression remained calm, but colder now. "You still have not explained the necklace." My father's silence answered more than words could have. Across the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted as Olivia and Daniel approached the wedding cake together beneath bright lights and camera flashes. Guests smiled. Music swelled softly. Perfect photographs captured another flawless Carter family moment. But standing there on the cold terrace beside Richard Whitmore, I finally understood something devastating. My parents were not afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing the secret they had built their entire lives around. The applause from the ballroom sounded distant now, almost unreal, like noise drifting from another life entirely. Olivia and Daniel stood beneath warm golden lights, smiling for photographs while guests gathered around the enormous wedding cake. My mother immediately forced herself back into motion the second attention shifted away from the terrace. I watched her smooth invisible wrinkles from her dress and lift her chin with practiced elegance. Years of social climbing had trained her well. No matter how unstable things became underneath, appearance always came first. "We are done here," she said quietly. "Richard, your son is waiting." Richard Whitmore did not move immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on my parents for one long moment before finally turning toward me. "This conversation is not over," he said calmly. Something about the certainty in his voice made my stomach tighten again. My father stepped between us slightly. Not aggressively, just enough to create distance. "I think it is best if Evelyn avoids unnecessary confusion tonight." Unnecessary confusion. Another carefully chosen phrase. My entire childhood had been built from phrases like that. Do not ask difficult questions. Do not make people uncomfortable. Do not create drama. I used to believe those rules existed because something was wrong with me. Standing there now, I finally understood those rules existed to protect them. Richard gave one small nod. "I will contact you tomorrow, Evelyn." My mother answered before I could. "That will not be necessary." Richard looked directly at her. "I was not speaking to you." Silence dropped heavily between them. Then Richard finally turned and walked back toward the ballroom without another word. I watched him disappear into the crowd of wedding guests until the terrace doors closed behind him. The second they did, the warmth vanished from my mother's face completely. "What exactly did you tell him?" she asked sharply. I blinked at her. "Nothing. Do not lie to me." My father lowered his voice carefully. "Margaret," but she ignored him. "You embarrassed this family tonight," she snapped. "At Olivia's wedding." I stared at her in disbelief. I embarrassed the family? My voice sounded strangely calm, even to myself. "You spent 30 years treating me like unpaid staff in my own home." My mother crossed her arms tightly. "You always exaggerate." That sentence hurt more than shouting ever could have. Because deep down, part of me still wanted someone to admit the truth. To acknowledge what had happened instead of pretending my entire life had been imagined. "Did I exaggerate when you moved me into the basement room?" I asked quietly. "Or when you stopped including me in family vacations? Or when Olivia got a car for her 16th birthday and I got a list of extra chores?" My father looked away first. My mother's expression hardened further. "We gave you stability. A home. Food." The words landed cold and ugly between us. Stability. A home. As though love had been optional. As though basic survival erased everything else. "You were difficult as a child," my mother continued. Quiet. Withdrawn. "You never fit in socially the way Olivia did." For a second I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable hearing her rewrite my entire childhood so casually. I had not been born withdrawn. I became withdrawn after years of learning that speaking rarely changed anything. "Enough," my father muttered suddenly. His voice sounded tired now. Older somehow. "People will notice we are gone." My mother inhaled slowly, visibly regaining control. Of herself. "Fine." She looked directly at me again. "You will stay away from Richard Whitmore for the rest of the evening. Do you understand?" I did not answer immediately. My silence alone seemed to unsettle her now. "Evelyn," she pressed. "Do you understand?" "Why?" I asked softly. Her eyes narrowed. "Because I said so." "No," I said quietly. "Why are you afraid of him talking to me?" My father closed his eyes briefly like the question physically hurt him. My mother's voice turned dangerously smooth again. "You are imagining things because a grieving man saw similarities that do not exist." "Then why are you panicking?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. My mother froze completely. So did my father. Tiny memories continued surfacing inside my mind faster now, rearranging themselves into patterns I could no longer ignore. I remembered being 11 years old and finding an old newspaper clipping hidden inside Grandma Rose's Bible. The article talked about a wealthy Hartford couple whose newborn daughter disappeared from the hospital under suspicious circumstances. I remembered asking Grandma who the couple was. She quietly took the clipping away and told me some truths become dangerous when spoken aloud. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now my chest felt tight remembering it. This conversation is over, my mother said coldly. Go refill the coffee station. I looked at her for several long seconds. Then, for the first time in my entire life, I said the one word she hated hearing from me most. No. The silence afterward felt enormous. My father stared at me in shock. My mother's face lost all color. Not because I had shouted. Not because I had insulted her. Simply because I had refused. Excuse me, she whispered. My hands trembled slightly at my sides, but I kept speaking anyway. I am not staff, I said softly. I am your daughter. At least that is what you have always claimed. My mother looked genuinely furious now, though she fought to keep her expression controlled. Do not do this tonight. Then tell me the truth. There is no truth to tell. Then show me my birth certificate. My father inhaled sharply beside her. Tiny. Quick. But enough. My mother noticed it too. Thomas, she warned quietly. He looked exhausted suddenly. Not angry. Not defensive. Just exhausted. Maybe we should leave this alone for tonight, he muttered. My mother turned toward him instantly. Leave it alone. Her voice remained soft, but something cold and desperate moved underneath it now. After everything? My pulse quickened. After everything. The words echoed inside my chest. My father rubbed one hand across his face. People are watching. And they were. Through the ballroom windows, I noticed several guests glancing curiously toward the terrace now. Olivia stood near the cake table looking irritated while Daniel whispered something quietly beside her. My mother straightened immediately the second she realized attention might be shifting toward us. Public image. Always public image first. Smile. She hissed softly toward both of us before opening the terrace doors again. Warm music and bright laughter spilled outside instantly. Then she walked back into the ballroom wearing that same flawless smile she had perfected years ago. My father lingered behind for one extra second before quietly saying something that made my entire body go cold. Some secrets destroy everyone once they surface, Evelyn. Then he followed my mother inside, leaving me alone on the dark terrace with the cold October wind and a terrifying realization slowly settling into place. My father had not denied anything. My father's words stayed with me long after he disappeared back into the ballroom. Some secrets destroy everyone once they surface. I stood alone on the terrace while cold wind moved through the dark gardens below, trying to steady my breathing. Inside, the wedding reception continued in perfect rhythm. Music swelled. Glasses clinked. Guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, while waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. The Carter family still looked flawless from a distance. That was the terrifying thing about carefully built lies. They often looked beautiful from the outside. I slowly touched the silver crescent moon necklace resting against my throat again. My entire life, it had simply been part of me. Something small and old that never seemed important enough to question deeply. But tonight, everything connected to it suddenly felt enormous. Dangerous. Real. The terrace doors opened softly behind me. I turned quickly, expecting my mother again. Instead, Daniel stepped outside alone. Olivia's new husband loosened his bow tie slightly as he moved onto the terrace, looking relieved to escape the crowded ballroom for a moment. He gave me a tired smile. There you are. I nodded politely. Congratulations. Thanks. He leaned against the railing beside me and exhaled slowly. Weddings are exhausting. I almost smiled faintly at that. Daniel Whitmore had always seemed kinder than the rest of our guests tonight. Calm. Observant. Different from Olivia's usual crowd. You okay? He asked after a moment. The question caught me off guard again. Strange how unfamiliar concern still felt. I am fine, I answered automatically. Daniel glanced toward the ballroom windows. That did not look like a fine conversation out here. I hesitated. Family stuff. Those are usually the worst kind. His voice carried quiet understanding beneath the humor. For a second, silence settled comfortably between us. Then Daniel looked toward me more carefully. My father does not get shaken easily, he said. But whatever happened tonight definitely shook him. My stomach tightened slightly. I did not mean to cause problems at your wedding. Daniel gave a small laugh. Trust me, my father would not care about etiquette if he thought something serious was happening. He studied my face briefly before continuing. He asked me a strange question 20 minutes ago. What question? Whether Olivia and you are biologically related. The words landed like ice water down my spine. I looked away instinctively toward the dark gardens below. Daniel's voice softened. I am guessing that reaction means this is bigger than awkward family tension. Before I could answer, Olivia's sharp voice cut through the terrace doorway behind us. Daniel. We both turned immediately. Olivia stood in the doorway, gripping her champagne glass tightly enough that I noticed tiny cracks forming in her polished smile. Everyone is looking for you, she said carefully. Daniel straightened. I was just getting some air. Olivia's eyes moved toward me briefly. Coldly. Well, maybe Evelyn should stop distracting the groom during his own reception. The old version of me would have apologized immediately. Instead, I simply stood there quietly watching her. Olivia shifted uncomfortably beneath my silence. Daniel frowned slightly. She is not distracting me. Daniel. Olivia lowered her voice carefully. Can we talk inside? Something tense passed silently between them before Daniel finally nodded once. Sure. Olivia turned away first, but not before giving me one final sharp look that carried years of resentment underneath it. The strange thing was, I suddenly realized she had always resented me. Not openly, not dramatically, but quietly, constantly. As children, Olivia hated whenever relatives complimented me for anything. If Grandma Rose praised my paintings, Olivia suddenly became sick or upset. If teachers spoke highly of my grades, Olivia found ways to redirect attention back toward herself. Back then I assumed all siblings competed sometimes. Now I wondered if something much darker sat underneath it. Daniel paused before following her inside. My father is not going to let this go, he said quietly. Then he disappeared back into the ballroom too. I remained outside another few minutes, trying to untangle the storm of thoughts inside my head. The night no longer felt stable beneath my feet. Tiny memories continued surfacing relentlessly now, each one suddenly carrying new meaning. I remembered how my mother refused to let me participate in school ancestry projects because those things are pointless. I remembered asking why there were no pregnancy photos of her before I was born. She told me the camera had broken that year. I remembered finding baby pictures of Olivia displayed throughout the house, while mine remained packed away somewhere unseen. Every explanation that once sounded ordinary now felt carefully constructed instead. Eventually, the cold forced me back inside. The ballroom lights seemed almost painfully bright after the darkness outside. Guests crowded around the dance floor while a jazz band replaced the string quartet for the evening reception. Laughter echoed through the room alongside the smell of expensive wine and roses. I quietly moved toward the side hallway leading back to the catering area, hoping for a few minutes alone. But halfway there, I stopped abruptly. Richard Whitmore stood near the hallway entrance, speaking quietly with an older woman I recognized vaguely from the rehearsal dinner. The second she noticed me approaching, her entire expression changed. Shock. Pure shock. Richard, she whispered, gripping his arm tightly. That is her. My pulse stumbled painfully. Richard turned immediately toward me. The older woman stared openly now, one trembling hand pressed against her chest. Oh my God, she whispered again. She is Claire's face. I froze completely. Richard moved closer carefully, like he was afraid startling me might make me disappear. Evelyn, he said gently. This is Eleanor Bishop. The woman's eyes filled instantly with tears. I was your mother's best friend. The hallway around me suddenly felt unstable. What? Eleanor stepped closer slowly. Claire used to carry a photo of her baby everywhere after the hospital incident, she said softly. She never stopped searching. Her voice trembled harder now. Richard showed me your picture from tonight 15 minutes ago. I thought he was mistaken until I saw you in person. I could barely breathe properly anymore. I do not understand any of this. Eleanor's eyes moved toward the necklace around my throat, and she visibly broke apart for a second. Claire designed that necklace herself, she whispered. She had matching ones made in Bar Harbor during their honeymoon. Richard spoke quietly beside her. There were only two. My knees suddenly felt weak. I reached automatically for the hallway wall beside me. Across the ballroom, I noticed my mother watching us now from near the head table. The second our eyes met, something cold and terrifying passed silently between us. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. Real fear. Then Eleanor asked the question that shattered whatever remained of the life I thought I understood. Evelyn, she said softly, did your parents ever explain why there are no records of your birth before 6 months old? Eleanor's question settled into the air between us like something fragile and devastating. Did your parents ever explain why there are no records of your birth before 6 months old? I stared at her while noise from the wedding reception blurred into meaningless sound around me. My mind felt strangely distant from my body, as if I were watching someone else stand there beneath the ballroom lights, wearing a black catering uniform and a silver crescent moon necklace that suddenly seemed capable of unraveling an entire lifetime. No, I answered quietly. Eleanor pressed trembling fingers against her lips. Oh God. Richard Whitmore remained very still beside her, but I could see tension locked tightly through his shoulders now. Not hope exactly. Hope was too dangerous for something this serious. What I saw instead was fear. Fear that he might be right. Fear that he might not be. Evelyn, Richard said gently, would you sit down for a moment? I nodded automatically because my knees no longer trusted themselves completely. Eleanor guided me toward a small private lounge connected to the ballroom hallway, away from most of the wedding guests. The room was softly lit with leather chairs and dark wood walls designed for quiet conversations between wealthy country club members. Through the partially open doorway, I could still hear distant laughter and music drifting from the reception. The contrast felt surreal. Somewhere 30 feet away, people toasted Olivia's perfect future while mine quietly collapsed into pieces. Eleanor sat across from me with wet eyes while Richard remained standing near the doorway like he could not fully relax yet. Claire never stopped searching for you, Eleanor said softly after a long silence. The word you hit me harder than anything else had tonight. Not the missing hospital records. Not my father's terrified expression. Not even the possibility that my entire identity might be false. You. As though I already belonged to another family. Another life. Please, I whispered. I need you both to stop talking like this is certain. Richard nodded. Immediately. You are right. His voice remained calm and careful. Nothing is certain yet. Eleanor wiped quickly beneath her eyes. But there are too many coincidences. Coincidences. The word almost made me laugh. Because suddenly my entire childhood looked less like coincidence and more like evidence I had spent years refusing to examine closely. I remembered how my mother avoided pediatric appointments unless absolutely necessary. I remembered how my father became furious whenever schools requested official records. I remembered how family discussions always stopped abruptly whenever conversations turned toward my birth. As a child, I accepted every explanation because children trust the people raising them, even when those people do not deserve it. What exactly are you saying? I asked quietly. Richard slowly sat across from me now, leaning forward slightly. I am saying there is enough here to investigate properly. Investigate. The words sounded unreal. You think my parents stole a baby? Richard's expression darkened with pain. I think something happened 34 years ago that was buried carefully. He paused. And your parents are behaving like people terrified of it resurfacing. My chest tightened painfully because deep down, I already knew he was right. My mother's fear tonight had not looked performative. It looked primal. Claire was a wonderful woman, Eleanor said softly. Gentle, artistic, kind. Her eyes moved toward the necklace around my throat again. She designed jewelry, painted landscapes, played piano terribly but enthusiastically. A faint broken smile crossed her face. And she had your eyes. I looked down immediately. Nobody had ever spoken about me with softness before. Not like that. It felt almost unbearable. Why would someone take a baby from the hospital? I whispered. Richard exhaled slowly before answering. Money. Desperation. Illegal adoption networks. In the early 90s, there were scandals involving hospitals working with private brokers. My stomach turned cold. You think my parents bought me? Neither of them answered immediately, which was answer enough. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, but I forced myself not to let them fall. Not here. Not now. I had spent too many years learning how to survive quietly to break apart in front of strangers, even kind strangers. Evelyn. Richard's voice softened carefully. Whatever happened was not your fault. Something painful twisted inside my chest at those words because nobody had ever said anything like that to me before either. My entire life had carried this invisible weight beneath it. The constant feeling that I was somehow defective, unwanted, hard to love. But sitting there now, another possibility slowly emerged instead. What if the problem had never been me? The lounge door suddenly opened sharply before anyone could speak again. My mother walked inside first with perfect posture still intact, though her eyes looked dangerously bright now. My father followed behind her looking pale and exhausted. "There you are," my mother said smoothly. "Guests have started noticing Evelyn disappeared." Richard stood immediately. We were talking privately. Clearly, my mother's gaze moved toward me. "You are causing unnecessary attention." I stared at her quietly. "Why are there no records from my first 6 months?" The question hit her like physical force. Tiny, invisible, but undeniable. My father looked away instantly. My mother remained still for half a second too long before answering. "What are you talking about?" "Eleanor said there are no records. And why would you trust strangers over your own family?" My voice came softer now. "Because strangers have shown me more kindness tonight than you ever did." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. My mother's composure cracked slightly for the first time all evening. "You ungrateful little." She stopped herself abruptly when Richard stepped closer. "Careful," he said quietly. My mother inhaled sharply through her nose. Then she looked directly at me with something colder than anger now. Fear mixed with resentment. "Do you have any idea what we sacrificed for you?" she whispered. The room went completely still. Even she seemed to realize too late what those words implied. My pulse started pounding so hard it hurt. "Sacrificed," I repeated softly. My father closed his eyes. Briefly, like he already knew the damage was done. Richard's entire expression sharpened instantly. "Margaret," he said slowly. "That was a very interesting choice of words." My mother immediately recovered again, but not fully this time. Tiny cracks had appeared beneath the polished surface, and everyone in the room could see them now. "I am finished discussing this," she snapped. "Evelyn, we are leaving." I looked at her sitting there in her designer gown with diamonds glittering against her wrists while panic quietly unraveled behind her carefully controlled expression. Then I realized something devastating. She was not asking me to leave because she cared about me. She was trying to remove me before someone uncovered the truth. The room felt smaller after my mother said those words. "Do you have any idea what we sacrificed for you?" She stood frozen near the leather chairs with one hand still gripping her designer clutch while silence pressed heavily against all of us. My father looked exhausted now, like a man watching a wall crack open after spending decades trying to hold it together. Richard Whitmore remained very still beside the doorway, but I noticed the sharp change in his expression immediately. He had stopped searching for possibilities. Now he was listening for confirmation. My pulse hammered painfully inside my chest. "What did you mean by that?" I asked softly. My mother recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I meant exactly what any mother means," she snapped. "Raising children requires sacrifice." But her voice sounded thinner now, less controlled. The polished mask she had worn all evening no longer fit properly. Richard stepped forward slowly. "Then perhaps you should explain why you looked terrified the moment I mentioned Hartford Memorial Hospital." "This is outrageous," my mother hissed. "You are accusing us of crimes based on a necklace and grief-driven fantasies." "No," Richard replied calmly. "I am reacting to your behavior." My father suddenly spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Margaret." His voice came low and strained. She turned toward him immediately. "Do not start." Something passed silently between them then. Something old, heavy, worn down by years. I saw it clearly now in ways I never had before. My mother was the architect of control in our family, but my father carried guilt. Deep guilt. It sat behind his eyes every time he looked at me tonight. "I want answers," I whispered. My voice shook slightly despite my effort to stay calm. "Please." The word please almost broke me because I realized how often I had begged quietly for love throughout my life without understanding that I was asking the wrong people for it. My mother folded her arms tighter. "There is nothing to explain." "Then why are there no records?" Richard asked. "Why does Evelyn possess a necklace designed specifically for my missing daughter? Why did your husband panic when I asked basic questions?" "Enough." My mother's voice cracked sharply through the room. Real fear surfaced beneath it now. Raw. Uncontrolled. "You do not understand what you are doing." Richard's expression hardened. "Then help me understand." Before she could answer, the lounge door opened again. Olivia stepped inside still wearing her perfect wedding smile, though irritation burned visibly beneath it now. Daniel followed close behind, looking uneasy. "What is going on?" Olivia demanded quietly. "Guests are asking questions." Nobody answered immediately. Olivia looked around the room and instantly sensed something was deeply wrong. Her eyes moved from Richard to Eleanor to me before landing on our mother's pale face. "Mom?" she asked carefully. My mother straightened immediately. "Everything is fine." "No, it is not." Olivia's gaze narrowed. "Why does everyone look like someone died?" Daniel moved closer beside his father. "Maybe we should all calm down." Olivia turned sharply toward him. "Calm down? Your father has been interrogating my family all night." Richard's voice stayed level. "I have been asking reasonable questions." "About what?" Olivia snapped. Silence. Then Eleanor answered softly before anyone else could. "About Evelyn." Olivia frowned immediately. "What about her?" Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "Richard believes Evelyn may be his daughter." The room went completely still. Olivia actually laughed at first. A short, disbelieving sound. "That is insane." Nobody joined her. The laughter died quickly. "Wait," she whispered slowly. "You are serious?" Richard held her gaze calmly. "I believe there is enough evidence to investigate." Olivia stared at me then. Really stared. I watched confusion move across her face first. Then calculation. Then something colder. "No," she said immediately. "No, that is impossible." "Why impossible?" Richard asked quietly. Olivia opened her mouth, then stopped. "Because she did not actually know. None of us did." "Because," she struggled briefly before looking toward our parents. "Tell them." My mother remained silent. My father looked away, and suddenly I saw fear appear in Olivia too. Tiny at first, but growing quickly. "Mom," she whispered. "Tell them this is ridiculous." My mother's composure finally cracked completely. "This should never have happened," she muttered under her breath. The words dropped into the room like broken glass. My stomach turned cold. Richard stepped closer immediately. "Margaret," he said slowly, "what exactly should never have happened?" She looked at him with years of exhaustion suddenly visible beneath her polished appearance. "You think you know what loss feels like?" she whispered bitterly. "You have no idea." My father closed his eyes briefly like he could not bear hearing this anymore. "Stop," he said quietly. But she kept going. "We spent years trying to survive while people like you lived in lake houses and country clubs." Her voice trembled harder now. "You have no idea what desperation does to people." Every word tightened something painfully inside my chest. Richard's expression darkened. "Margaret." She looked directly at him now. "We could not have children." The room went silent again. Olivia stared at her mother in confusion. "What?" My mother inhaled shakily. "After Evelyn." She stopped abruptly. "Too late." My pulse stumbled violently. "After Evelyn." Not before Olivia. Not before trying again. "After Evelyn." Richard noticed it too. "After Evelyn what?" he asked quietly. My mother pressed one trembling hand against her forehead. My father finally stepped forward then. "Enough." His voice sounded hollow now. "Defeated. We cannot keep doing this." My mother turned toward him in panic. "Thomas." But he looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Truly looked at me. Not through me. Not around me. At me. And what I saw in his eyes nearly destroyed me. "Shame. We were told nobody would ever come looking," he whispered. The room tilted beneath me. Olivia gasped softly beside us. Richard went completely still. My mother looked furious now, terrified beyond reason. "Thomas, stop talking." But my father kept staring at me with exhausted grief carved deeply into his face. "The adoption was arranged privately," he said quietly, "through someone at the hospital." My heartbeat roared so loudly I could barely hear the rest. We were desperate. Margaret had miscarried twice. We had no money. No options. He swallowed hard. Then they offered us a baby. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. Daniel instinctively moved closer like he thought I might fall. Olivia looked physically sick now, one trembling hand pressed against her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No," but my father's eyes never left mine. "Your real records were destroyed before we took you home." The world around me blurred painfully. 34 years. 34 years believing I was unwanted because something inside me was broken. And all along, the truth had been something far worse. I was never theirs to begin with. The room fell into a silence so complete that even the distant wedding music seemed to disappear for a moment. I stared at my father while his confession echoed through my chest like something physically breaking apart inside me. "We were told nobody would ever come looking. Your real records were destroyed before we took you home." 34 years of confusion suddenly rearranged themselves into something horrifyingly clear. Every missing photograph, every cold glance, Every moment I had been treated like an outsider inside my own home. It had never been accidental. My mother sat rigidly in the leather chair now, her perfect appearance finally collapsing beneath the weight of truth. Olivia looked pale enough to faint. Daniel stood frozen beside her while Eleanor quietly wiped tears from her face across the room. Richard Whitmore remained completely still, but grief radiated from him so heavily it almost hurt to look at him. "You bought me," I whispered. My voice sounded distant. Small. My father closed his eyes briefly. "It was not like that." "Then what was it like?" I asked softly. He opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. Because there was no version of this story that could sound acceptable. "We thought," he stopped again. "We thought we were saving you." My mother suddenly laughed once under her breath. Bitter. Exhausted. "Saving her," she repeated quietly. "That is what they told us to." Richard's eyes locked onto hers instantly. "Who told you?" My mother looked up slowly. "A woman named Diane Mercer." Richard inhaled sharply. Eleanor went pale beside him. "Diane Mercer worked at Hartford Memorial," Eleanor whispered. "She disappeared after the investigation started." My stomach twisted violently. Investigation. The word made this all feel terrifyingly real now. Not family dysfunction. Not misunderstandings. Crimes. There was an investigation? I asked quietly. Richard nodded slowly without taking his eyes off my mother. Several newborns disappeared over a 4-year period. Most were never traced. Olivia made a broken sound beside us. "Oh my God." Daniel instinctively reached for her hand, but she pulled away immediately, staring only at our parents. "Tell me this is not true." My father looked shattered now, older than I had ever seen him. "Olivia." No, her voice cracked sharply. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not steal somebody's baby." My mother finally snapped. "We did not steal anyone." Her voice echoed harshly against the walls. "You think life was fair to us? You think we had options?" Richard stepped closer slowly. "So desperation justified taking another family's child? You still had your wealth." My mother fired back bitterly. "Your influence. Your lawyers. We had nothing. You had no right." Her face twisted sharply then. "And what would you know about losing everything?" For the first time all evening, real emotion broke through her carefully polished exterior completely. Tears filled her eyes, though anger burned hotter underneath them. "I buried 3 pregnancies before Evelyn," she whispered. 3. Silence settled heavily across the room again. My father lowered his head. Olivia looked stunned. I felt strangely detached listening to it all now, like my body had separated from my emotions just to survive the weight of everything happening. "Diane told us there was a baby whose parents would never stop looking," my mother continued quietly. "At first I said no." Richard's expression hardened painfully. "But eventually you said yes." She looked directly at him then. "Eventually grief changes people." Richard stared at her with visible disgust now. "Claire spent 34 years grieving too." Those words broke something inside the room. My mother looked away first. Eleanor covered her mouth while tears slipped down her cheeks silently. "Claire died believing she failed her daughter," Richard said quietly. "Do you understand that?" My mother pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. "I never wanted anyone hurt." The words sounded absurd hanging in the air around us. I almost laughed again. Not because it was funny, because it was unbearable hearing someone speak about hurt after building an entire life from it. "Then why did you hate me?" The question left my mouth before I could stop it. My mother looked at me sharply. For a moment, nobody else moved or spoke. "I did not hate you," she whispered. I stared at her quietly. "You made me eat dinner alone in the kitchen." Her face tightened. "You were difficult. You made me sleep in the basement for 11 years. The house was small. You told people I embarrassed the family." My voice remained soft, but steadier now. "You treated me like a servant at Olivia's wedding." My mother looked shaken now in a way I had never seen before. Because for the first time, someone was forcing her to hear the truth out loud. Not polished, not rewritten, just true. "Every time I looked at you," she whispered suddenly, "I remembered what we did." The room went silent again. My chest tightened painfully. My father closed his eyes. Olivia looked horrified. And suddenly everything made terrible sense. She had never hated me because I was difficult. She hated me because I reminded her of the lie. Richard spoke quietly beside me. "So instead of facing your guilt, you punished the child." My mother broke then. Not dramatically, quietly. The way people collapse after carrying something poisonous too long. I tried to love her, she whispered. I really did. Tears slipped down her face now, ruining expensive makeup beneath the country club lights. But every birthday, every school recital, every time she called me mom, her voice cracked apart. I kept thinking about another woman somewhere crying for the same child. My breathing became uneven suddenly. Because despite everything, part of me still wanted to hear that she had loved me. Even damaged love. Even broken love. Human beings are cruel that way. We ache for warmth from the same hands that hurt us. Olivia slowly stepped backward like she no longer recognized any of us. My whole life was fake, she whispered. No, I said quietly before thinking. Everyone looked at me. I swallowed carefully. Your life was real. My voice trembled slightly now. Mine was stolen. Silence again. Heavy. Final. Then Richard reached slowly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. Before coming back here, he said quietly, I made a call. My pulse quickened instantly. He unfolded the paper carefully. There was enough concern tonight that I arranged an emergency DNA test through a private lab one town over. Eleanor inhaled sharply. My mother went completely pale. Richard looked directly at me now, and for the first time all evening, I saw something terrifyingly close to certainty in his eyes. The preliminary results came in 20 minutes ago. The room seemed to stop breathing the moment Richard said the words preliminary results. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away. Outside the private lounge, the wedding reception still glowed beneath chandeliers and soft jazz music. But inside that small room, 34 years of lies balanced on a single folded sheet of paper in Richard Whitmore's hand. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mother stared at the paper with pure terror now, all traces of elegance stripped away. Olivia looked pale and shaken beside Daniel, while my father sat heavily in the leather chair like the weight of everything had finally crushed him completely. Richard unfolded the document slowly. His hands trembled slightly despite every effort to remain composed. Then he looked directly at me. The probability of biological relation between us is 99.9%. Silence. Total silence. I felt the words hit me physically before I fully understood them. 99.9%. My chest tightened so sharply I almost could not breathe. Eleanor covered her mouth with both hands as tears spilled freely down her face now. Richard closed his eyes briefly like the confirmation hurt and healed him at the same time. My mother made a broken sound under her breath. Olivia stared at me in complete shock, but I could not look at any of them, because suddenly my entire life split into two separate realities. The first reality was the one I had survived inside for 34 years. The unwanted daughter. The burden. The invisible sister. The girl who cleaned kitchens while everyone else sat at the table. The second reality stood quietly in front of me, now holding a DNA report with trembling hands. A father who had spent decades searching for me. A mother who died believing she failed to protect her child. No, my mother whispered suddenly. No, this cannot be happening. Richard looked at her with a level of coldness I had never seen in another human being before. It already happened 34 years ago. She shook her head frantically now. You do not understand. Diane told us nobody would ever trace it back. The room went still again. Richard's jaw tightened sharply. Trace what back? My mother pressed both hands against her face briefly before speaking through uneven breaths. There were records, payments, arrangements. My father looked horrified. Margaret, what is the point anymore? She snapped bitterly. Tears streaked down her carefully applied makeup now while years of buried panic spilled out uncontrollably. We were drowning in debt. I was broken after the miscarriages. Then Diane came to us. Richard's voice remained terrifyingly calm. And she offered you my daughter. My mother's silence answered him. Olivia staggered backward until Daniel caught her arm gently. Mom, she whispered weakly. How could you do this? My mother looked toward her with desperate grief. I wanted a family. So you stole somebody else's? Olivia's voice cracked completely. My father finally spoke again, his face hollow with regret. At first we thought we could give her a good life. The irony of those words almost destroyed me. Good life. I thought about childhood birthdays spent washing dishes while Olivia opened presents in the dining room. I thought about eating leftovers alone after family dinners because there had not been enough seats at the table. I thought about spending winters in the basement room listening to laundry machines rumble through the walls while my sister decorated her upstairs bedroom for college visits. A good life. Richard looked at my father with visible disgust. You spent 34 years punishing her for your own guilt. My father lowered his head immediately because he knew it was true. I tried to stop it sometimes, he whispered. But Margaret, do not blame me alone, my mother snapped sharply. You signed the papers too. Their voices blurred around me after that. Accusations, regret, fear, excuses. But I barely heard any of it anymore because one thought kept echoing louder than everything else. My real mother looked for me until the day she died. The idea broke something open inside my chest so painfully I had to grip the edge of the chair beside me just to steady myself. All those years I believed I was difficult to love. All those years wondering what flaw inside me made my own family treat me like an obligation instead of a daughter. But somewhere else, another woman had spent decades grieving me, searching for me, loving me. Richard noticed the tears finally slipping down my face and stepped closer carefully, almost cautiously, like he was afraid any sudden movement might shatter me completely. Claire never stopped believing you were alive, he said softly, even when everyone else told her to let go. My breathing became uneven. She died before finding me. His own eyes filled then too. Yes. The grief inside that single word felt unbearable. Eleanor quietly reached into her purse and removed an old photograph folded carefully with age. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. Claire carried this for years. I looked down slowly. The photograph showed a young woman standing beside the ocean with dark chestnut hair blowing across her face and a silver crescent moon necklace resting against her collarbone. My necklace. My face. It felt like staring into another version of myself across time. My chest ached so sharply I could barely breathe around it. Oh God, Olivia whispered softly after seeing the photo. She looks exactly like Evelyn. For once, nobody corrected her by saying I was overreacting or imagining things. The truth sat openly between all of us now. Impossible to hide anymore. Richard looked toward me again. I know tonight has been overwhelming, he said gently. But you are not alone anymore. The words nearly undid me completely. Not alone anymore. Such a simple sentence. Yet nobody had ever truly offered me that before. My mother suddenly stood abruptly from her chair, panic overtaking her again. We need lawyers. Her voice sounded frantic now. Before this gets public. Richard turned toward her slowly. Public, please, she whispered. You already have your daughter back. The room went cold. Because even now, after everything, she still cared most about protecting herself. Her reputation. Her image. Not me. Never me. Richard's expression hardened instantly. You think this is about reputation? She looked exhausted suddenly. Defeated. I do not know what it is about anymore. I finally stood slowly from my chair then. Every eye in the room turned toward me immediately. For 34 years I had learned to stay quiet while other people controlled every version of my story. But tonight something inside me had changed permanently. I looked first at my mother, then my father, the people who raised me inside a house full of silence and shame. You could have told me the truth, I said softly. My father began crying quietly then. Small, broken sounds from a man finally crushed beneath his own choices. But my mother just stared at me with hollow eyes. Would it have changed anything? She whispered. I thought about that carefully. Then I looked down at the photograph of Claire Whitmore smiling beside the ocean with hope still alive in her eyes. Yes, I answered quietly. I would have known I was loved by someone. The room stayed silent after my words. I would have known I was loved by someone. Nobody argued with that because there was nothing left to argue about anymore. The truth had stripped everything down too completely. The wedding music drifting faintly through the walls sounded strange now, almost cruel in its normalcy. Somewhere outside the lounge, guests still laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, while photographers captured elegant pictures beside white roses and gold candles. But inside that small room, entire lives had already shattered beyond repair. My father remained seated with his face buried in trembling hands. Olivia stood motionless near the doorway, staring at me like she no longer understood where she ended and I began. My mother looked hollow. Not angry anymore. Not defensive. Just empty. Richard Whitmore stayed beside me quietly, giving me space instead of rushing closer the way some people might have. I noticed that immediately. He did not try to claim me now that the DNA results confirmed the truth. He simply stayed near enough that I would know I was not alone if I chose to look up. And somehow that hurt more than dramatic emotion would have, because it felt real, gentle, patient, the kind of care I had spent my entire life searching for without knowing its name. Eleanor wiped tears from her face and looked toward Richard softly. Claire would have loved her so much. The sentence nearly broke me again. I lowered my eyes to the old photograph still resting in my hands. Claire Whitmore smiled back at me from 30 years ago with the same dark eyes and tired half-smile I saw in my own reflection every morning. For the first time in my life, I understood where my face came from. Not from strangers. Not from some invisible flaw that made me different from everyone around me. From her. What happens now? Olivia asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately because the truth was, none of us fully knew. Some revelations do not arrive with instructions attached. They simply tear through everything that existed before and leave people standing inside the wreckage trying to decide who they are afterward. Richard finally spoke. Now we tell the authorities what happened. My mother flinched visibly. Please. Her voice sounded fragile now. Do not destroy us. Richard looked at her calmly. You destroyed yourselves years ago. She looked toward me desperately then, and for one dangerous second, I saw the familiar guilt she used against me my entire life, trying to rise again. The silent expectation that I should protect everyone else from consequences, that I should shrink myself smaller to make room for their comfort. But something inside me had changed too deeply tonight for that to work anymore. Evelyn, she whispered softly, I know I failed you. Failed me. Such small words for 34 years of emotional starvation. But I did raise you. I looked at her quietly. You housed me. The difference settled heavily between us. Tears slipped down her face again, but for the first time, I did not feel responsible for stopping them. My father slowly stood from the chair beside her. He looked older now than he had only hours earlier when this wedding began. She is right, he whispered. We gave her a roof, food, school. His voice cracked painfully, but we never gave her peace. Silence again. Heavy, honest. Olivia stared at our father with tears filling her own eyes now. Did you ever love her? She asked softly. The question hung in the room like something sacred and terrible. My father looked at me for a very long time before answering. I think I was too ashamed to love her properly. My chest tightened painfully because somehow that answer hurt more than hatred would have. Hatred is simpler. Shame poisons quietly. It turns affection into distance and guilt into cruelty until nobody remembers what love was supposed to look like anymore. My mother covered her face completely then and began crying silently. But even now I felt strangely detached watching it happen. Not cold, just tired. Like my heart had spent too many years bruised to break any further tonight. Richard stepped closer after a while. Evelyn, he said gently, there is no pressure for anything right now. I looked up at him slowly. You do not have to decide anything tonight. Not about me. Not about any of this. His voice stayed steady despite the grief still visible behind it. I only need you to know one thing. I waited quietly. Richard's eyes filled again before he spoke. Your mother searched for you every birthday. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Every year, he continued softly. She would buy a small cake and light one candle for the age you would have been. Eleanor smiled sadly through tears beside him. Claire kept a bedroom for you until the day she died. Something inside me finally broke completely then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way frozen things crack when warmth finally reaches them after too long. Tears blurred my vision while I clutched the old photograph tighter against my chest. Somewhere out there, a woman I never got to meet had loved me fiercely enough to keep searching for 3 decades. Loved me enough to refuse letting go even when everyone told her to. All those years I believed I was difficult to love because the wrong people raised me inside their guilt. Richard moved slowly then, careful enough to give me time to step away if I wanted. But I did not. When his arms wrapped gently around me, the grief hit all at once. Not only grief for Claire, grief for the little girl I used to be too. The one who spent years believing she deserved loneliness. Richard held me carefully while I cried for a life neither of us got to have. Across the room, Olivia quietly removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist and placed it onto the side table beside me. Grandma Rose's bracelet. The one meant for me all along. I think this belongs to you, she whispered. I looked at her through tears. For the first time all night, she did not look angry or jealous. Just lost. Human. I did not know, she said quietly. I swear I did not know. And strangely enough, I believed her. Olivia had benefited from the lie, but she had been raised inside it too. Another child shaped by secrets she never asked for. Richard slowly released me after a while, though one hand remained steady against my shoulder. Outside the lounge windows, I could see snow beginning to fall softly over the country club gardens. Tiny white flakes drifting beneath golden lights. Quiet. Clean. New. I wiped my face carefully and looked one final time toward the people who raised me. My mother sat collapsed in silence. My father looked broken by regret. For years I imagined revenge would feel satisfying if I ever stood above them emotionally. But standing there now, I felt something else entirely. Freedom. Because for the first time in my life, I finally understood the truth. I had never been unwanted. I had simply been stolen from the people who loved me first.